We're on chapter 7. So in the book, chapter 7 is on page 26. But the truth of the matter is we've actually turned the page. So we're going to be looking at page 28 in the actual Tanya book. And then I'm going to put it on the screen as well for those people who are looking on the screen. So at least we have, frames of reference. Okay, what are we talking about? This is the chapter where, as I put in the little blurb that I sent out, we're going to learn about how to calibrate the spirituality of an ordinary day, which sounds like quite a nice thing to do if you can achieve it, right? If you can pull it off. Sounds like an amazing thing to achieve. But let's understand exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve. Before you get to the conversation of what to do, you have to know what you're trying to achieve, right? You can't start the conversation by saying, okay, so this is how you do it, if you don't understand what it is that you're trying to do. So that's where we're going to start, is just to try and understand what is our goal over here. What does that mean? So, for context, at the end of the previous chapter, we learned that there are two possible realities that a person could live in. There are two possible realities that the world could live in. One possibility is what we call the world of Kedusha, the world of holiness. Now, we could make this really personal and ask the question, do you live in the world of holiness? Right? Do you live in the world of holiness? That's the question. You wouldn't even know how to answer that question. Would you know how to answer the question? How do you answer that question? Do you live in the world of holiness? What does that mean? Right now you're sitting in a shul. Okay, that sounds like a holy place. So right now I'm living in the world of holiness. What does it mean to live in the world of holiness? So the one option is that we live in an environment that is holy. We live a life that is holy. And that is the ultimate aspiration of Judaism, is to live a holy life. Like the Torah tells us that you should be holy. Kedoshim to you should be holy. For the average person living in the 21st century, it means nothing. It means like, wouldn't they tell me to live holy? We're just like, you're crazy, Well, what exactly are you trying to tell me? We don't even begin to understand what that means. If you want to tell a person that you should live with peace of mind, you should live with success, you should live with wisdom, you should live with insight, perhaps we could relate to that. But to live with holiness, what does holiness even mean? Okay, so that's the problem. We don't necessarily understand what the objective is, where we're going, what we're trying to achieve. Okay, that's the first point. Then you have an alternative. The alternative is if a person is not living in the place in the world of holiness, so where they're living. Now let's try and answer that. If you're not living in the world of holiness, where you're living?
Material world.
Okay, so material, right? The material. Now let's be really clear about the difference between the material world and the materialistic world. Okay, there is a difference. What's the difference? Material is just a substance, really, actually. Material world, this is material. The book is made out of material, right? There's nothing wrong with a book just because it's made out of material. It doesn't make it automatically something that is inappropriate or something that's objectionable. It's a fact. It's material. So materialistic is different to material. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about this evening. So the opposite of living in a holy world is not necessarily to live in a material world. The opposite of living in a holy world is to live in an unholy world, which is just as useful as saying holy. These are not terms that we use, let's be honest. Are these terms that we use? When last, outside of a shiur, outside of this setting, when last did you ever speak about something in context of whether it's holy or unholy? Seriously, it's not part of our conversation, not part of our language. So that means that it's not really useful for us to use these words if they're not words that we use in normal language. It's ethereal vocabulary, it's just completely abstract. Yet that's exactly what we're going to be speaking about in this chapter, is the principle of whether we live in a holy or an unholy world. So in the previous chapter, we got our first clues. If something is holy, the definition of holy means that it is committed to and connected to what Hashem wants. Okay, so let's try and understand what that means. So for example, if you had to take the Torah scroll out of the ark, yes? Is it holy? Is the Torah scroll holy? Yes. Is it part of the material world? Yes. So what makes it holy? What makes the Torah scroll holy? It's got God's name. Okay, so now that's an interesting point. Right, very interesting point. I'm going to just dwell on that for half a second. So we'll say that the reason that the Torah scroll is holy is because it contains Hashem's name, and it contains Hashem's name multiple times. So that must obviously mean that it's holy. So listen to this for an interesting halacha. You're going to freak when you hear this halacha. Okay? Jewish law says that if you have a Jewish person, I'm going to repeat that. If you have a Jewish person who becomes an apostate, in other words, they publicly reject the values and the authenticity of the Torah, or they publicly reject God, and then that person writes a Torah. Okay? That person writes a Torah. What do you do with the Torah? Burn it. But it's got God's name. So it's not that simple. It's not as simple as saying what the content is will determine whether something is holy or not. So again, so why is the Torah scroll holy? The reason the Torah scroll is holy is because, let's be honest, the Torah scroll has no other purpose except to do what Hashem wants. Doesn't have another purpose. What else could you do with the Torah scroll? Nothing. Its only purpose is to do what Hashem wants. So that gives us a good insight into what holy means. Holy is not something that's flying up there with the angels and is divorced from the physical reality and is completely spiritual in nature. Holy means any item, any person, or any activity that is fully oriented towards doing what Hashem wants. So now, let's make this really personal. Right now, are you living a holy life? Right now, in this moment. Yes. In this moment, you're living a holy life. We don't know what happened before. We don't know what will happen afterwards. But what we do know is that in this moment, we're living a holy life. How do we know? Because what we're doing is we're doing what Hashem wants from us. He wants us to learn His Torah. That's what we're doing. He wants us to learn His Torah in such a way that will help us to grow and develop and deepen our spiritual experience. That's what we're doing. So this is a holy life that we're living right now. We're living a holy life. Welcome aboard. Right? Okay, so what's the opposite? How do you say? What's the opposite of living a holy life? Let's go to the furthest extreme. The furthest extreme. How could you be the most opposite of living a holy life? Would be what? Again, to live a holy life is to do something that is completely committed to and connected to what Hashem wants. So what is an unholy life? Or an unholy activity? Is what? Is to do something contrary to what Hashem wants. Contrary to what Hashem wants. So, in other words, let's just say, I'll use a terrible example that, please God, nobody over here could ever relate to because it's such a horrible thing. Let's say, God forbid, that we were speaking Lashon Hora about somebody. Never happens, right? We don't know what that is. Somebody's speaking negatively about somebody else. At that moment, what life are they living? An unholy life. Okay? So that's the definition that we're working with right now. And as we started to explore last week, the reality is, in the course of the day, how much of our day is living a holy life? A majority, a minority, a vast majority, vast minority, half. What would you say? How much of our day are we living a holy life? Okay, so everybody's a little bit self-conscious. Nobody wants to own up and say, listen, this is where I'm holding. So I'll give you from my own life, okay? Will that make everybody more comfortable? So I could say that in my life, most of the day is not a holy life. Well, it might sound a little bit shocking coming from a rabbi. Is that what we're paying you for? You're supposed to be living a holy life. You're supposed to represent us, right? You're supposed to be like some kind of whatever. But the reality is, there are many, many things. For a start, sleeping. I don't know about you, but I sleep a few hours. Maybe you sleep less. I don't know. If you sleep a few hours at night, at that point in time while you're sleeping, are you doing a holy activity? Because you're sleeping? No. Nowhere in the Torah does it say, thou shalt sleep. That's a means of connection to Hashem or fulfilling what Hashem wants. So a whole chunk of the day, before we even start, is naturally associated with something which is not holy. Okay, let's get to the next thing. Do you eat? Thank God we live in the modern world. Nobody really eats. In the modern world, people stuff things in their mouth while they're running from place to place. We don't eat. There are very few times we sit down with like a whole thing and, unless you're very disciplined, maybe very disciplined. I don't know, you have your meals, balanced food and all that. Okay, that's much better, right? So is that holy? Let's say a person sits down in the morning, they make sure that they have a fruit and they have a protein and they have a this and the whole shtick, right? Is that now a holy thing?
Probably not.
It's not.
But if it's healthy food?
And it's healthy food. So that means what you're doing is not self-destructive. It doesn't make it holy. And then there's a part of the time that we drive, because we all drive much more than we really want to. We spend a fortune of time in our cars. And then you have to do shopping, and then you probably run a business. And if you don't run a business, then let's even say, like I said, I'm going to use myself as an example. As a rabbi, what do you think rabbis do? You also have to go out and fundraise and balance books and see people about their personal issues that may not necessarily be Jewish issues. Before you turn around, how much of the day is holy? Not a whole lot. Let me ask the other question. How much of the day is unholy? The other extreme. Meaning to say, I'm not asking the question, how much of the day are we doing things that are not holy? Here's an interesting question. I'm going to come to the question in a second. So I'm not saying how much of the day do we do things that don't qualify as holy. I'm asking how much of the day do we do things that qualify as unholy? How much of the day? The majority, right? Now that's what we call a healthy self-esteem. A person says, the majority of the day I'm doing things that are unholy. It's not true. You can feel better. It's not true. It's not true that the whole day or the majority of the day we're doing things that are unholy, because we don't spend the majority of the day doing things which are prohibited by the Torah. We don't. So what do we spend most of our day doing? We're not sure. Because it doesn't seem to fit into either category. So is eating a holy act? I don't know. Doesn't sound like it. Is eating an unholy act? I don't think so. Why would it be an unholy act? Especially if it's healthy. Is sleeping a holy act? No. Doesn't say in the Torah you should sleep. Is sleeping an unholy act? No, it doesn't say in the Torah don't sleep. So in other words, the majority of the things that we experience in life don't seem to fit into either one of these extreme definitions. Because the definition on the one hand is I'm doing exactly what Hashem wants from me at this particular moment. And the other is saying I'm doing exactly contrary to what Hashem wants at this particular moment. And most of the things in life, we're not sure. So for example, when a person goes to sleep, let's say a person goes to sleep at 10 p.m. It's probably considered early in today's world, right? A person goes to sleep at 10 p.m. I don't know, does Hashem want me to go to sleep now, or did he want me to learn Torah for another half an hour and then go to sleep? A person wakes up in the morning, their alarm goes off and they press snooze. Did God want me to press snooze? Or did he want me to get out of bed? You understand what I'm saying? There's a whole massive part of our lives that is undefined. So if we're going to speak about setting the spiritual calibration for our daily life, we can't even have that conversation until we know what is the calibration. What are we looking for? What's the goal? What is the goal of a Jewish day? Is the goal of a Jewish day to learn as much Torah as we can? Is the goal of a Jewish day to fulfill as many mitzvahs as we can? If that's the case, then fine. Then we have you could do it like the kids do. You can put a little chart on your fridge, and you can have like a whole lot of things. How many mitzvahs did you do today? How many hours of Torah did you learn today? And then you could kind of tick it off. But life is not that simple. Life is not that black and white. So we need something more useful to work with. Now, on the Zoom, somebody put a question into the chat, which is, if you say a bracha, if you say the blessing before you eat food, does that not now make it into a holy experience? Saying a bracha over the food, does that not now make it into a holy experience? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Hey? Saying a bracha.
Yeah, connecting with Hashem.
So you're connecting with Hashem. Obviously, if you're saying a bracha, you're obviously connecting with Hashem. And connecting to Hashem is what we consider a holy activity. Yes? Fine. Okay, good. Any other thoughts? Any other input on the question of the bracha and what it does to the eating experience?
It's a sign of gratitude.
It's a sign of gratitude, that's right. Okay, so is gratitude necessarily holy? Okay, so it's a good thing to do. It's definitely a good thing to do. Does it turn it into some high level? Not necessarily. Does it turn it into a holy thing? Not necessarily. What were you going to say, Cherry?
I'm just thinking now, sorry. Saying the brachas elevates the...
Okay, so there you go. So you saying it and somebody else is typing it at the same time. That saying a bracha elevates the food. I'm not absolutely sure that it's that simple. And I'll give you an example. In fact, two examples. Example number one. If a person, and this is a real story, by the way, this is not something I'm inventing. You see, now we've got some more information that's just coming to the chat that might be a little bit more relevant to the conversation. Fine. So let me use an example that is a true example. It's a true example. A parent comes over to the rabbi and asks the rabbi as follows: we don't keep a kosher home. Should I encourage my children to say a brocha over the food that they eat if the food is not kosher? Okay? So just saying the brochas, that's not enough. That's not enough. That's not going to make some magical transformation of the food and now suddenly it's going to become kosher. So the brocha in itself is a gateway, it's a preparation. It does not necessarily change the experience. I'll give you another example. And this is that's a clearer example because everybody understands and appreciates. Obviously, if something's not kosher, then the brocha is not going to turn it around. But let's take this one step further. You know, there's a big confusion in the Jewish world. I don't know if you're familiar with this. The big confusion between what we are permitted to eat and what we are obligated to eat. Right? What do I mean by that? On Pesach, are you permitted or obligated to eat matzah? Obligated, right? On Pesach, you're obligated to eat matzah. Okay. On Purim, are you permitted or obligated to eat hamantashen? Permitted, right? There's no obligation that you have to eat hamantashen. In other words, believe it or not, much to the absolute shock and surprise of certain people, you could go through the entire Purim, you could go through the entire Hanukkah, not have one hamantashen, not have one donut, and still fulfill all the requirements of the festival.
Yeah.
Right? Now let's go one step further. Are you permitted or required to have good food on Shabbos?
Yes.
Required, yes? You're required to have good food on Shabbos. Are you permitted or required to have a second helping? You may not even be permitted. How do you know you're permitted?
I mean, if you would
Right?
go for beds.
You understand what I'm getting at? What I'm saying is that just because a person puts something into a context, so you say a bracha before you eat the food, it creates a context, does not automatically make the entire process a holy process. If you take something, you put it onto a Shabbos, because there's a mitzvah to eat good food on Shabbos, does not automatically mean that to be gluttonous is now considered part of the mitzvah. So it can't just be about the intro, it can't just be about the gateway, it can't just be about the fact that I said a bracha and then from here on out everything is automatically holy. I said a bracha. You know, it's like people think, what makes people outside of the Jewish world, they think, what makes a food kosher? The rabbi blessed it. That's not how it works. You don't just get the rabbi to come and bless your food and then it's automatically kosher. In the same way, you can't bless your food and it's automatically elevated. So that's why we have to drill down more deeply into this concept of how do we deal with the majority of things that occur in our lives which don't have a predefined status in terms of connection to Hashem or disconnection from Hashem. And so we have to become wise. How do we engage with these things? And somebody already put this into two people actually already put this into the chat, at least in a very sort of introductory level. So let's see what he has to say. Okay, so on page 28, it's the second line, the second word. And if you're looking on the screen, so then you're going to find it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the last word of the fifth line. Okay, the last word of the fifth line. So actually, no, it's a little bit further. I'm sorry, it's a little bit further. The sixth line, the middle of the sixth line. Okay, so everything that he's spoken about so far, if you remember, we began this chapter by saying that there are a whole lot of things that fit into the same category. Our nefesh habahamis, our animal soul, is one of those things. Another one of those things is the souls of animals or of plant products or of mineral products that are kosher. And the behaviors or the thoughts or the words that we say that are not necessarily directed towards Hashem. So they're all put into one category. What is that category? So now we're going to get a really valuable working definition which helps us to understand most of the world that we live in. V'hakol ka'asher lakol, all of the above in all of its detail, nishpa v'nimshach, is all filled, is all motivated, is all drawn from from a second dimension of the world of Klippa, which we'll talk about in a second. She Klippa Revis, get through the technical jargon first. It is the fourth out of 4 different types of Klippa that exist. Hanikres Klippas Noiga. Okay, that's what we have to know. We need to know this word, Klippas Noiga. Okay, that's the word we're going to need to know in order to go further, or the phrase that we're going to need to know. 2 words, Klippas Noiga. Okay, let's understand what that is. I'm just going to read a little bit further and then we'll unpack it. Sheba Olam Hazeh, which is something that exists only in this world. Hanikra Olam HaAsiyah, this world being called the world of Asiyah. We're told that there are 4 different spiritual dimensions. Ours is the lowest of the spiritual dimensions. It is called Asiyah, which means the world of action. Ruboy Kekuloi Ra, this is the good news. It is a world which is almost entirely bad. Okay, that's the good news, right? Rak mi'at toiv mu'urav b'seicha. And it's just got a little bit of good in it. So there's quite a lot of information over here for us to unpack. Let's take it piece by piece. We're going to talk about the word klippa. We're going to talk about the word noiga, put them together to create the phrase klippas noiga. We're going to describe briefly what it means to live in this olam ha'asiyah, this lowest world of action. And we're going to define what it means to say that the world is majority bad, because I think many people would be either, I've been saying this for many years, or they'll say, how dare you speak about our world that way? Surely there are good things in the world as well. Okay, so these are things that we have to unpack. So, yesterday, I took an apple for a snack. It's a true story, by the way. Took an apple for a snack. And outwardly, it was a shiny, beautiful red apple. I take a bite. You know where the story is going, yes? It looks were deceiving, let's put it that way. Of course, I was very, upset about the experience, threw out the apple. So that today I went to take an apple as a snack. Having learnt my lesson from yesterday, I took a knife and sliced the apple in half before I began, because it looked just as juicy and red on the outside. Guess what? Just as bad on the inside as yesterday's apple. I don't know what's going on with apples, but that's what happened. 2 in a row, 2 out of 2. Threw it out. That, in a sense, summarizes one of the greatest challenges that we have in life, which is that things are not as they appear to be. If things were as they appeared to be, we would not need those full body scanners at JFK Airport. Because you just have somebody sitting over there and all the criminals and terrorists would look like criminals and terrorists. So you wouldn't have to do these x-ray machines and scanners. So it's probably fair to say that one of the greatest challenges of living in our world is that things are not the way that they appear to be. Have you ever spoken to somebody, God forbid, who was a victim of crime? Ever spoken to somebody? What do they always say? Didn't look like a criminal. Because what do we expect? Expect that if somebody's going to come and fleece you of a whole lot of money, God forbid, whether it's done through the threat of a gun or whether it's done through some Ponzi scheme or whatever the case is, they don't arrive with one of those broken noses with the stitches over it. It's not what happens. Because one of the greatest challenges of living in our world is things are not as they appear to be. So the bright, red, shiny apple could be completely rotten to the core. I guess Hashem felt obviously that this was a necessary illustration for the tonight's shir. That's why he sent me 2 apples like that in a row. So please God, from now on, all the apples are good because I've used the illustration. Klippas Noiga is the reverse. Klippas Noiga means that there are certain things in life that look outwardly like they have no real significance in the spiritual realm. They're not going to be part of our spiritual journey. We can't see the value. So it's the opposite, right? Anything in this world which is unhealthy, this is an axiom of life. Anything in this world that is unhealthy always looks better. Right? The stuff that is healthy never looks as good as the stuff that is unhealthy. That's the way it is. And that includes, by the way, fruit and vegetables. Ask people today, I'm not going to mention brands because you can get into trouble from mentioning things in a public forum and recordings, but everybody will tell you certain places, their produce is unbelievable. Their fruit and veg is unbelievable. It's crunchy, it's fresh, it's colorful. Have you ever pulled a carrot out of the ground? Did you ever have a vegetable patch when you were a kid? You pull a carrot out of the ground, it doesn't look anything like the stuff you buy in those shops. It doesn't come out so perfectly straight, so smooth, so bright, so orange. It doesn't come out like that. The world that we live in is, the more sparkly and bright it looks, the less likely it's wholesome and healthy. That's our world. So the shiny red apple could be the one that's the most horrible on the inside. But the flip side of that is that if there is something that has an opportunity to generate holiness, that means to say, if there's something in our world that has an opportunity to create a meaningful connection between us and God, many, maybe most times, we won't be able to see that from a superficial perspective.
That's scary.
On the one hand. On the other hand, we could train ourselves how to look at things. Right? So what's scary? What's scary is that the people who look like they are the most straight-laced, decent human beings are the con people. That's scary. What's not scary, we could learn. We could learn things about nonverbal communication, certain clues about how people speak, about how they move when they speak. We can learn things that will help us to identify who the threat is. And we can learn wisdom. I'll tell you, here's a very interesting exercise that a friend of mine and I did a number of years ago. We went to the high schools, the Jewish high schools here in Joburg, so particularly the King David high schools, and we ran it was a fascinating program. The introduction to the program was a big PowerPoint on a massive screen, and we put pictures of individuals on the screen and asked one question, and the kids had to answer that one question. So for example, the one picture on the screen was a picture of a person, and the question was, if this man arrived at your house to repair your refrigerator, would you feel comfortable? All the kids, or the majority of the kids, said yes, because he had this like really straightforward, like innocent looking face. Who was the picture? The infamous serial killer son of Sam. Okay? Sam Berkowitz, exactly. Interesting, right? Another picture that we put on the screen, and this was absolutely mind-blowing to me. We're talking in a Jewish school. The other picture we put on the screen was an older man with very thick glasses. The question was, if you went to visit a retirement home and this man was sitting alone on a chair, would you go talk to him? Would you feel confident or interested to go talk to him? Obviously there's always those people who that's their style. They would go over to it. But the majority of kids said that they didn't think, A, that they'd be confident to just go after him and strike up a conversation, and B, they didn't feel that it would be valuable for them to go and have a conversation with him. Who was the person in the picture? Menachem Begin. So the shocking part was that they didn't recognize who he was. But the fascinating thing is, here you've got somebody who is one of the most incredible human beings in our recent history as Jewish people, but you look at the person without knowing the context, you don't see the value. So that's scary, right? As you say, it's scary that we could live in a world where there's something in front of our face that has incredible value and incredible potential, incredible opportunity, and we don't know how to see it. It's scary. That's called klippa. Because a klippa is, the directional station of a klippa is a peel or a shell. When the klippa is bright and shiny like my apple, that does not ensure that inside of it is something wholesome or worth eating. The reverse of the corollary is, if the klippa, the outward appearance of something, seems like it can't possibly be part of a spiritual journey, doesn't mean automatically that it isn't. And that's something we get wrong a lot. That's why we're always looking, speak to people. You can be pretty much guaranteed that the vast majority of the Jewish population, and possibly a great majority of the international world population, would have similar responses to, how do you become more spiritual? How do you become more connected? You've got to do things that are very spiritual. So you want to be really connected? Go to Nepal. Cut yourself off from the world, smash your cell phone, and meditate for 3 years without speaking. And then maybe you'll become spiritual. And if you're not as extreme as that, you can't necessarily do that, then at least go into your garden every single morning and do some yoga or some meditation or some mindfulness experience. Because in our minds, that helps us to get away from the stuff of this world, and that will help us to become more spiritual. This teaching we're about to start to work through says, but a whole lot of the stuff of this world has spiritual potential. We're just looking at the wrapping, we're just looking at the klippa, we're not seeing it for what it really is. Therefore it is called klippas noiga. What's noiga? It's one of the multiple words in Judaism that refers to light. Noiga is like a glow. Klippas noiga. It's a peel or a shell where if you are trained and if you have the eye for it, you will be able to see beyond the wrapping and find the light that lives inside of it.
Would you say that in women that is like our intuition in a sense, because we're a lot more spiritually connected than men are, for example?
Okay, so you're asking if a woman would naturally have a better intuition by virtue of the fact that a woman has a more natural connection so would have a better intuition into knowing how to identify, so to speak, where the light lies. And that might be the case. That might well be the case. Regardless of whether we have better or let's not say better, more or less developed intuition, doesn't mean that we can't learn. Right? And that means that if a person is more intuitive, they still have what to learn. And if a person is less intuitive, they still have the opportunity to learn. And that's really what's important over here. So not only is it a difference between, for example, women and men, it will be the difference between one individual and the next. One person will be more inclined to see the spiritual potential than the next person, even if they both happen to share the same background, the same basic education, and the same gender. So we have to see ourselves as individuals, and we have to recognize that every single one of us has what to learn. So, klippas noiga, right? Let's go back to klippas. Let's go back to the example of food, because it's a great example. Why is it a great example? It's something that Jews care about. So, you can always get the attention of the Jewish community if you're talking about food. And if you can't talk about food, then at least tell them there will be food and they'll come for the food, even if they don't come for what you're talking about. It's like one of the funny things about being a rabbi, yeah? What's the objective of a rabbi? Is to get as many people as possible to engage with their Judaism. Right? That's the objective. So if a person will come to another shiur, will do another mitzvah, will daven, whatever the case is. Obviously, every rabbi also has those humorous moments where you get the message from somebody on a Friday afternoon saying, Rabbi, is the brocha sponsored this week? And it's not because they want to volunteer necessarily to sponsor, just want to make sure that the food is worth getting out of bed for. So food is a good example for us. In food, we can identify the three categories of what we're talking about. Holy food, unholy food, and klippas noiga food. In other words, there's certain food where the holiness doesn't need our assistance, it is already there. Let's go back to the example of matzah on Pesach. Now I know that every single time I use the example of matzah, there's always going to be at least one person. There's a word for this person in Yiddish, it's called a nudnik. There's always one person who says, yeah, but Rabbi, I love matzah. Okay? So I'm just preempting that before somebody shouts out, how much they love matzah. When a person eats matzah on Pesach, why are they eating matzah on Pesach? Okay, so I'll help you. Nobody eats matzah on Pesach because of their love affair with the food. Even the people who tell you, I eat matzah the whole year round. Rabbi, I eat matzah the whole year round. You're right. And when it comes to Pesach, you don't eat matzah on Pesach like you eat the whole year round. Certainly not at the night of the Seder. And I'll explain it simply. When you eat matzah, maybe somebody here eats matzah the whole year round. When you're one of those people who eats matzah the whole year round, how do you eat matzah the whole year round? At your leisure. If you feel like having matzah, you have matzah. If you don't feel like having matzah, you don't have matzah. If you want to have half a matzah, have half a matzah. If you want to have 3 matzahs, have 3 matzahs. If you want to put peanut butter or egg or whatever you want on matzah. Do whatever you want. How do you eat matzah at the Seder? Pesach Seder? It doesn't get worse than that. There's a requirement. You've got to eat this amount of matzah. You've got to eat it within a certain amount of time. Okay, I know not everybody does this at their Seder, but this is how it's supposed to be done. You're supposed to eat like, if it's a machine matzah, 3/4 of a matzah at least. And if it's a handmade matzah, half a matzah at least, within 3 to 4 minutes, leaning to the left. And then no sooner do you finish, they give you another one. And they say, no, this time you've got to put leaves on it. Right?
On the topic of food, as an example, what about, like, say, the Shabbos Brocha, right? On a Saturday, everyone's just come out of shul. What happens if you only have a cup of coffee, or if you actually eat from the spread, like say
whatever you eat?
Okay, like, is it an obligation to have the mazonos
From the brocha. Okay, that's an interesting question.
Or is it okay, do you fulfill the mitzvah, hypothetically, the holiness, if you just have a cup of coffee?
Okay, it's an interesting question. So the question is, if you're at the brocha at shul on Shabbos, how much do you have to partake? How much food do you have to partake of in order to fulfill the requirement? Okay? So I'm going to say this. There is no requirement to eat at a brocha on Shabbos. There is a requirement to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. If that's where you will hear Kiddush, and you're not going to hear Kiddush when you get home, then you have to do what it takes to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, which is either to drink wine or to eat a piece of mazonos in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. Okay? It's got nothing to do with fulfilling the mitzvah, so to speak, of being part of the brocha. Okay?
I did not know that.
No, and I realize that's, right? Okay, so that's where that's kind of where the clarity comes in over here. Okay, so matzah is holy food. Only on Pesach night, by the way. The minute Pesach ends, matzah is no longer holy food. You get 0 credits from eating matzah this evening. Nothing. No value whatsoever. So when is it holy food? When it is in the direct context of doing what Hashem wants. And what does Hashem want? He wants us to eat that food at that particular time. So at that particular time, it's holy food. Okay, let's use the opposite extreme. You'll excuse my example, but a shtickle chaza, as they say, right? A little piece of chaza, of bacon, or whatever the case is. Holy or unholy? That is unholy with a capital U. That's as unholy as you can get. It's the opposite extreme of matzah, and even more, because matzah, we said, is only holy at certain times, and chaza is unholy at all times. Okay? So when you look at chaza, as a Jewish person, a Jewish person looks at a piece of bacon, what's the response of the average Jewish person when they look at a piece of bacon? The one thing I'll never eat. Right? And if a person grew up possibly in a frum home, they might even say, ugh, disgusting. They have no idea. They have no idea if it does taste nice, if it doesn't taste nice. It doesn't make a difference. It's ingrained in us. We know that there is no light in that. There's no value in that. There's no holiness. There's no opportunity to connect to Hashem. Kripas noiga means it doesn't look like matzah. I don't see the mitzvah. Whatever it is that you had for supper this evening, okay, let's just say for argument's sake that you decided, I don't know, you're going to have spaghetti bolognese for supper, right? Is there holiness staring at you out of a bowl of spaghetti bolognese? No. Is there a mitzvah to eat? No, there's no mitzvah to eat spaghetti bolognese. Is it treif? Hopefully not, right? Hopefully, interesting, somebody asked a very interesting question. I'll get to that in a second. So if you look at the spaghetti bolognese, is it holy? No. Is it unholy? No. So what is it? It's blank. It's a blank canvas. When I look at it, this clipper, I don't see holiness in it. I don't. Nobody sits down at their regular meal. In fact, nobody sits down at their Shabbos meal and looks at the food and says, it looks holy to me. I know that it's a mitzvah to eat this. Yes, there's a mitzvah to have good food on Shabbos. Did anybody say it has to be that food? No. Matzah, it says clearly it has to be that food. So somebody asked an interesting question. So what happens if it's Shabbos? And you say, instead of 2 challahs, you say hamotzi on 2 matzahs, but it's not Shabbos. But it's not Pesach, I'm sorry. So it's Shabbos, so it's a mitzvah to have 2 loaves, and you get to say the bracha over it, and it's not Pesach, so is there now a mitzvah to be able to eat that matzah? And the answer to that would be absolutely yes, but not because it's matzah. That would be the same mitzvah if it were challah or pita or matzah. It wouldn't make a difference because the mitzvah is to have bread on Shabbos. You wouldn't get the holiness of matzah. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. Let's go. Let's continue. So that's where we're delving over here. Klippas noiga. Klippas noiga means the world of stuff that at first glance appears not to have a spiritual or holy value. But if I know what I'm looking for, I can find and experience a holy value in it. But I have to know what I'm doing. It's not going to happen automatically just because it's got the Beth Din stamp. So now it's automatically, ticket to heaven. The other thing that we have to acknowledge, just to round off the sentence, because the lion's share of this chapter is going to be unpacking this concept of klippas noga, how you identify it and what you do with it, which we'll talk about. But the other thing we spoke about over here, which was fairly disturbing, is the definition of our world as being ruboi kekuloi ra, almost entirely bad, rak ma'at toiv ma'urav b'seichel, just a little bit of good that's mixed into it. I don't know, is that really a Jewish view? Do we really believe that the world is a bad place? Is that really a Jewish view? At this time of the year, we're headed towards the 10th of Shvat, which is next Tuesday evening, please God, which is the Yortzeit of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and it's also the date that our Rebbe took over as the leader of Chabad. And the very final discourse that the previous Rebbe distributed just before he passed away was based on a teaching in the Midrash, based on a verse in the book of Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, that Hashem calls this world a beautiful garden, His beautiful garden. So I can say the world is a bad place. Hashem calls it a beautiful garden. How dare we come along and say it's a bad place? Rubai Kakule Ra, it's almost entirely bad. So you know what you've got to understand. Bad is not as we define bad. In other words, what do we think bad is? We think bad is criminal, dishonest, greedy, self-interested. That's generally what we think is bad. So for example, I could imagine that there are people living in certain places, I won't mention which places, who might be very comfortable to change this sentence to say, the government of our country, Rubai Kukulayra, is almost entirely bad, with a little bit of good mixed in. Because in our minds, what's bad? Corruption, theft. But here, our definition of bad means this. It's fascinating. Our definition of good and bad, and this is the way it is throughout the Torah, particularly in the more mystical teachings of Judaism, good is light. How do we know that? So when Moshe was born, when Moses was born, the Torah says, Vatere oisoi, his mother saw him, ki toivhu, that he was good. So all the commentaries effectively, without saying these words, ask the question, what else did you think a Jewish mother was going to say about her baby? She looked at him and said, not too bad. She thought he was good. Obviously she thought he was good. What does the Torah have to tell us this for? The Torah doesn't tell us information unless that information is relevant, right? So what's the Torah telling us? So the Midrash says, and this is one of the methodologies that we learn, that we use to learn Torah, is we compare unique terms where else they appear in the Torah, and then we correlate the information. She saw ki toiv. Ki toiv is an expression that is used by Hashem during the course of creation. And the Lord saw and it was good. Ki toiv. And the very first time that the word ki toiv is used is when Hashem created light. So that creates a precedent for us that whenever we use the expression good, we're talking about light. Moshe's mother looks at him and sees that he's good. That means there was a light, there was an aura about him that was so profound that it literally affected everybody who was in the household, even when you were not in his presence. It was that powerful. So good equals light. What is light? Light is when things are clear. Bad is dark. Bad is when things are not clear. When Hashem appears, like He does at Mount Sinai, that is the ultimate good. Because now there's no doubts, there's no questions. The Talmud tells us people who were ill were healed, because there can't be any negativity in a place of light. True light, not electric light, not even sunlight. We're talking about divine light. There can be nothing negative. What is bad? Lack of light, lack of clarity, lack of vision. What's our world? Almost entirely bad. That means that to live in our world means 99% of what we're told, what we believe, what we see, and what we experience is unclear. That's why we live with so much stress and so much anxiety and so many doubts in our lives, because nothing is absolutely clear. Ma'at toy, they're little sparks of clarity that come up in our lives, unless, of course, we learn. When we learn how to illuminate the world that is naturally dark. So first we have to acknowledge it. If a person is not willing to acknowledge that there's so much darkness and confusion around, then why would they look for clarity? So we have to acknowledge it. Our world is a place which is primarily a place of confusion, dilemmas, and lack of clarity. And then, knowing that, let's get to work. How do we calibrate the spirituality of our day? Starting to learn how to find more light in the darkness. And that's what we'll start to learn more about in this chapter. There's the upside, the downside, and he's going to give us, two different ways that this whole thing could pan out. Either we're successful or we're unsuccessful, and how that affects us in terms of our journey, in terms of our development, in terms of our connection to Hashem, as please God will continue next week.